There's
right?
inspiration literally everywhere.
Right, right.
And like, for example, like on my walk every morning around the green belt, I see this guy, this homeless guy, and he sleeps on the same bench. And I always say like, "Hey, good morning." And he always smiles and says, "Good morning." And we
Cool.
talked today, like what a beautiful day it was. I'm like, this guy here is like, he's smiling and he's happy, and he's just happy with like a bench to sleep on in nature. Right. So like, what excuse would I have to be unhappy? Like, you can find inspiration literally from anywhere in the world, so long as you take 2 seconds to pause and think about it.
This episode is brought to you by West Coast Beach, a year-round beach volleyball club on the west side of Los Angeles in Santa Monica, California. At West Coast Beach, we aim to get 1% better every day, both on and off the court. You can find more info about us at westcoastvbc.com and on Instagram with handle at westcoastvbc. All right, I'm here with the one and only Travis Mewhirter. Travis, thanks for joining us, bro.
Dude, Wex, my brother, what's happening? Manhattan Beach Open, like 2016, I think it was.
I've played against you. I've played with you. You're awesome. You're inspiring. That's why I wanted you here, man.
Dude, you got like one of the best vibes on the whole beach. I swear. You just, anytime Aaron Wexler's on the beach, it's just a way better day, just a way better energy out there.
That's awesome, man. Likewise, right back at you, dude. I
I
appreciate that.
appreciate that. I think that's why we played against each other in the Laguna Open,
Mm-hmm.
and then like right after that, it was just like, well, he's really positive and happy, and I'm really positive and happy. So it's just like it's match made in heaven right there.
For sure, dude. All right, Travis. Here's your bio. I mean, wow. You went to the University of Maryland. You went from Maryland to Florida to California. You're all kinds of different kinds of athletic vibes in you, but you're a beach volleyball athlete. You qualified for events on the AVP, P1440, internationally in the FIVB and the North Seca Tours. You are an award-winning sports writer, and your work has been featured in the Washington Post, Yahoo Sports, Volleyball Magazine, Dig Magazine, among others. You're the author of We Were Kings, right there.
I see you've got it right back there. I appreciate that.
I'm going to leave a link below to this too, so people can grab that. And you're also the co-host of the Sandcast podcast with Triborn, the most listened to podcast in beach volleyball. And that's sandcastvolleyball.com. And on Instagram, sandcast_podcast. Your Instagram is at Tram EW. Did I say that right?
Yeah, just Tram Mew. My nickname
Tram
my
U.
whole life growing up was Tram, since like from 5th grade till I was about 23. And then so it was just Tram. And then my last name is Mewhirter, so I just shortened it up to Mew.
Love it. And on Twitter, at Travis_MEW.
Yes, sir.
Travis, welcome again. Thanks so much for being here. Let's jump right into it. What does living an inspired life mean to you?
Living an inspired life. I mean, I think there's so many different definitions of it, right? Like I feel like the self-help industry has like blown up recently. And like, I'm sure you've probably got a couple books on that beautiful shelf behind you. I love books. So I'm like kind of digging into what those titles are, but there's so many different definitions of like what an inspired life might be. But for me, it's kind of simple. It's just like waking up excited to do whatever it is you want to do. Like if you're really excited to play beach volleyball and like that's what you do, then you're living your inspired life. If you wake up and you love writing and you go out and your day is full of writing, whatever, maybe it's a copywriter, or maybe you're writing like legal documents, or maybe you're writing sports or books or whatever. But like if you wake up every day and you get to do something that like genuinely kind of like lights your soul up, then I think that's an inspired life. And I don't think there's any one definition for it, but that's the way I look at it. And when I know that, I'm not heading in the right direction, if there's ever a morning I wake up and I'm like, I don't want to do this today or tomorrow or the next week, that I know that I need to kind of pause, maybe go out camping with my wife, get a little, go out in nature, take a little pause and figure it out. But I think if you wake up and you're excited to do what you're doing, then you're living whatever your inspired life might be.
I love that. And it's, to me, why you inspire me is you just choose that. Like, don't you just choose that every day? You just choose to be like that.
Yeah, I think there's one of my friends, I'm sure it's an image that's gone around fairly popularly recently on Twitter and Instagram, whatever social media you go on. But there's just this guy who has like a jar. It's just like a stick figure cartoon. It says happiness, and this other guy is like, "How'd you get that?" And he's like, "Oh, I made it myself." And I think it's there's a lot of truth to that. And obviously, like everyone will have ups and downs. It's not like you can just be happy 1000% of the time. And I
Right.
think that
Right.
it's when you can look at certain situations, your obstacles or adversity in life, and you're like, you know what, this is not ideal, but something great's going to come of this. I think that that is kind of a great mindset to espouse, and so I don't necessarily choose happiness every day, but more like choose fulfillment or a sense of progress or a sense of like knowing that maybe my path is a little bit less traveled by, but it's the one that I want to go down.
I
And
love
and I,
that.
and I so I recently got married in February, and so my dad in his
Congrats.
speech, thank you, appreciate that. And my dad in his speech at the rehearsal dinner, he was like, like Travis has always just kind of carved his own path. Like no one in my family is a writer. And, I went to journalism school without really any background in writing or knowing anything about like writing sports, and like how like most newspaper guys make like $28,000 a year. It's pretty tough to live off that. But I was like, well, I like writing and I like sports. That's what I'm going to do. And then, no one in my family had ever like moved out of the state, let alone, just to Florida. I did zero research on the town I moved to Florida. I just was tired of the snow and started looking. I was like, any sports writing job south of Virginia will do. Started applying everywhere I could. Picked up a job in Florida and just moved there. Like zero scouting reports or anything. And then like beach volleyball, I fell in love with it in Florida. Knew really nothing about it, and I knew that California was where you had to go to if you wanted to be a beach volleyball player. So I just kind of up and moved to California and just like on a flyer. So I think it's just if you just follow what excites you and what like kind of gets you stoked, like you're gonna figure it out. You'll make it work if you really love it that much.
I love that, Travis. You're so awesome, bro. I want to take this. So this whole project is about tools for the youth athlete to try to find inspiration both in and
Okay.
out of the game. And I want you to answer this questions from two different perspectives. This particular question that I have for you right now: how do you stay inspired inside the game as well as outside the game? And I want you to answer that from an athlete point of view as well as a writer.
Okay. So from inside the game, for me, I think everyone's motivated by different things, right? So I've never been the type, like I grew up in like this dream household, like your American dream, like like great mom, great dad who just like love each other a ton, like still together. Two brothers that I'm really close with. We like fought like cats and dogs, but like now we're each other's best friends. Like we were all each other's best men at each other's weddings. So for me, I'm inspired by progress and by
Mm.
support. And so when I win a match that maybe I was the underdog in, I get really excited about that. And so I go to practice the next day. Like that doesn't give me a sense of complacency. That makes me like, I want to get that feeling more and more. Right. Where
Love
other
that.
people are motivated by like a particular loss. And like that, those sting for me too. And I get motivated by that. But it's when I win a match, or like in a Norseca qualifier this past year, in the qualifying round, I was playing Jake Gibb and Taylor Crabb, and me and Kyle Friend took them to 3 sets, and I was like super motivated by it. Like we lost, but I was like, that's arguably a top 10 team in the world that, we took the first set off and we were up like 14-7.
I think they're
And
ranked number 8 right now in the world.
yeah. So like
Yeah.
I look at stuff like that. That's how I stay motivated within the game. And you can find progress. It can be a big thing. Like you won a tournament, you had a big upset, or you just like something clicked at practice. You're like,
Right,
wow, like,
right.
that passing form that I've been working on that finally clicked. Or like, I hand set 20 clean balls in a row today. Like, okay, let's work on 25 tomorrow. So that's how I
Love
stay
that.
motivated kind of within the game, is that sense of progress.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Yeah, and carry that further as a writer and a podcast host.
As well as a writer. So writing is just kind of like my release, I guess, is the that's just kind of how I find my peace and calm. For some people it's meditation, for other people it's prayer, and like those both have like a pretty big part of my life. But like writing for me is just meditative. It's just me and a blank sheet of paper, and it's just like this mind dump. And like I'm a weird kind of writer because like I never outline anything. I just go and like I never know what I'm going to write beforehand. It just spits out. It's like that book behind you. Like I had no idea what each chapter was going to look like, and then I was like, God, that didn't turn out half bad. All right, like so for me, like writing is just super meditative, and so I know that when I'm kind of writing, I'm in the wrong spot when I'm writing something that it feels like work where and Michael Lewis described this wonderfully on the Tim Ferriss podcast. He's like, so he's the author of Moneyball, The Big Short, and a bunch of other bestsellers. And he was like, I never write a book because I feel like I need to write it. He's like, I just write the book that I know that only I can write and only I would really want to write. And that's kind of
That's awesome.
how it is with me too. So I know if I'm writing a story, I'm like, gosh, like I don't want to write this, like this story's terrible, then I know that, and I've quit a number of jobs because of that feeling. I was like, no, this job like isn't for me. I don't really get excited about writing it.
So just to stick on your writing for a second, I mean, first of all, this book is amazing, and your ability to use imagery and anecdotes, and you have like this uncanny ability to bring the reader right in with you. Did that? Where'd that come from? Did you practice that? Did it come naturally?
That's a great question. So I think I majored in journalism at the University of Maryland. And so pretty much every class, one of the first things they said, they're like, if you want to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader.
Mm,
So if
like that.
and I have been obsessed with reading my entire life. So when I was little, my parents had like a 9:30 p.m. curfew or something, and so what I would do when the Harry Potter series was out, so my bedroom was sort of it was across the hall from the bathroom, and so my parents would turn off my lights and be like, "All right, like good night." But what I would do is I would go across the hall, turn on the bathroom light and open the door, and then open my door and lean my book out into the hallway so I could read it using the bathroom's light from my bed. I was like, I'm not
Wow,
breaking curfew. And like, what parent could be mad at that? They're like, well, like my kid was reading again,
that's so
like,
cool, bro.
so I've always loved reading. And I think that, and I love reading everything from fiction to nonfiction or, whatever it may be, whatever topic, doesn't really matter. As long as the writing is decent, like I love it. And when you read a lot of good writing, you see a lot of different writing voices, right? So some writers like Mark Twain, he can literally have a 2-page long sentence. Then you have Wright Thompson, who's my favorite sports writer, and rarely does he ever have a sentence longer than 10 words. And then you have
Hmm.
Mitch Albom, who is probably my favorite author. I've got my own bookshelf over here. He's got a couple of books on, and he has like fantastic imagery and just the way he describes things. And when you read all these different voices and you start to write and practice your own, what you find is that your writing voice is sort of this combination of all your favorite voices and you begin to kind of carve it out yourself. So, the imagery, I don't even know if I'm like that good of an imagery writer, but I like reading authors where the imagery is really rich. Like I'm reading this book over here called Shantaram, which I think you would really like.
Okay, okay.
But the imagery in it is like unbelievable. And so it's just, I think that the way you write is a reflection of what you love to read.
I love it. Let's stay on the inspired feeling. Let's talk about being uninspired, and I want you to talk about it again from an athlete point of view as well as a writer, because I feel like that's your main discipline. You can throw in podcasting as well, because
Okay.
I'm an aspiring podcaster
Yeah.
myself. Um, when you have the uninspired feeling, because it happens to all of us,
Oh yeah.
whether you're on the court, or maybe you're writing and you're just stuck. What are some tools to help you get out of that and get back to the inspired feeling?
That's a really good question. So I had a little bit of this. I think kind of uninspired, maybe synonymous with burnout.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so last year, I think I counted up maybe 35 to 37 beach volleyball tournaments in one year. And I remember like there was a point midway through where I was like, you know what? I just don't care if I lose this match. And that's just like not okay.
Right,
you know
right.
and um and like my knees had been starting to hurt, and so like then I didn't want to go to practice because then I knew the practice would hurt. And if you don't want to go to practice, then it's just if your process is going to be wrong, then it's just not going to be ending up in a good result. So for me, just taking a step away from it for a second, or finding maybe a different hobby, not saying like completely derail your path, but David Epstein wrote this great book called Range. And what he was saying is that we're entering this age of specialization where kids have to figure out what they're doing when they're in like sixth grade, and be it athletics or what they want to do in life. And he's saying that like what they're finding is that the rate of burnout and just like people are switching college majors 80% of the time you go in with a major, you don't end up graduating with that major. And we're just like putting these people in holes too early and that they get burned out. And so what his answer to that solution is to like kind of be a bit of a generalist and have like a bunch of different things you're passionate about. So like if you know if my writing, I'm just like, man, I can't write one more feature story today, then I can go down to the beach and play beach volleyball.
Yeah.
And then maybe my experience in beach volleyball might want to make me write about that. Or if I don't want to write, then I pick up a book or I go camping, which is a burgeoning passion of mine. um, so I think when you I would say find something else that you're passionate about and just like, give it a day, give it a week. And so it'll ease your burnout and kind of lights you up about, because learning is super fun. If you're learning something new, you get passionate about something else. And so not saying like abandon it and just trade it for something new, but just kind of spread across your skill sets. You have multiple things that you're passionate about.
I love that message, especially right now during quarantine, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of us don't have the ability to go do what we love to do, or do what we know that we love to do. So we have to look for other things. So that's a great message. I want to ask you about practice and game time. Again, two different perspectives, because I really value your perspective off the court. What's the difference in feeling from an inspired practice and an inspired game, and how does one carry over to the other? Again, from an athlete point of view as well as a writer point of view.
Okay. So for it's a good question for beach volleyball. Honestly, I'm still trying to figure it out. And I wrote a story, I think at the end of last season, where I'd kind of toggled between the various different types of competitor that I wanted to be. Right. So you have like the Steph Curry competitor, right? Where he's kind of like happy, he's goofing off, but he's still like, he's competitive.
Right.
You don't win a couple NBA championships on accident. Then you have like, the Kobe, right? And he's just like stone cold killer. And he belongs in there with like MJ and Tiger Woods, where he's just like, you're not going to see those guys like smiling and goofing off. Like
And Karch.
they're out there to, yeah. And Karch, like they're out there to kill you.
Hmm.
And then you have maybe the guys who like the trash talkers, like the Draymond Green, and that's how they
Hmm.
get fired up.
Right.
So for me, kind of finding the game time was figuring out what type of competitor I was and what emotional state in which I thrive the most. And for me, I found that I'm like a Steph Curry, which I would label you as a Steph Curry as well, where you're just like good vibes and happy and laughing and smiling. And that doesn't mean you're not competitive. That just means that's the type of energy that you thrive off of when you compete. So for me, when I'm in game time, like that for me, it just looks like happiness.
Love
Whereas,
that.
which is funny because in practice, I'm a lot more serious. Like I'm like really focused, and I'm like today I'm hammering out passing, I'm hammering out setting. I want to get my serve dialed in so that when it comes game time, I can relax and know that like and have fun and know that all the work's been put in. Now's the fun part, right? Because we practice way more than in a game. So like when you finally get to the game, it's time to let go and just have fun. And like you can't do anything about your preparation at that point. So if you prepare the right way, then you can let whatever type of competitor you are just take over.
I love that. I love how you said let go. It reminds me of healthy detachment, right? You're
Yeah.
just like, yeah, like, whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, and like one of my biggest things, and doing our podcast, Sandcast has helped a ton with that, because one of the biggest messages from across all the greats, and I think you can learn a lot about talking to a number of like, and you've talked to a bunch of Olympians, professional athletes, and that when you find a trend, you're like, okay, there's something to it, and literally everyone says, control the process, and results will happen. If
Yeah.
you only focus on results, then it's not going to work out that well. So it's kind of that growth mindset. If you focus on the process, things will figure themselves out in the long run. You can just kind of let go of the results.
Reminds me of that phrase, control the controllables. It
Yeah.
keeps coming up.
Yeah. And that's John Mayer, one of my favorite guys of all time. He always says that. I love that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we always say it, when we're coaching at West Coast, focus on what you can control, which is the same idea.
Yeah. And really the only thing you can control is when you practice and when you're getting better. Cause like you can't control what the weather's going to be in your match, but you can control if you see a crappy day outside, you can control whether you go practice or not. And
Yeah.
and we had Mike Lambert on our podcast,
Hmm.
and he was talking about Karch. And he said that there was like this terrible, crappy day. And he was like, well, maybe we shouldn't practice. And he was like, Karch was loving it. He's like, let's go. Like, no one's practicing today. Like, that's the stuff you can control. And now, like, when there's a rainy day, who's going to be ready? Karch and Mike Lambert. because they practiced on it.
Yeah, you know what the word that comes to mind when you're telling me that is craftsman.
Yeah.
And craftsmen love to practice because they love to practice their craft, you know? And so how do you practice writing? How do you practice speaking?
So really the best way to practice writing is you write. So at Maryland, it was really funny because so I had pretty much all journalism classes, and so I never had tests or exams. Like I had never had any idea how to study because all we did was write. And so my first assignment in
That's cool.
journalism 201, it was called journalism boot camp, because that was when basically if you were going to be a journalism major, like you had to get through that. But people who like only half wanted it, they all dropped out. And so it was the school at Maryland has the highest attrition rate. And that could be both because of job prospects and because of the difficulty of the program.
Okay.
But so our first assignment was called Man on the Street interviews. And so what we had to do, he's like, you need to go out to, and we were each assigned an area around town. He's like, you need to go out to Bowie, and you need to interview 10 people and do a 500-word story on each of them before you're allowed back in this class. And he's like, however, you will also get docked if you miss class for attendance. So you like, and none of us really had any idea how to do that. And like, these University of Maryland's not in a great area of Maryland. So like we're going out, we're like asking these people about like their lives and like
These
trying
are
to figure out
strangers,
stories.
right?
Yeah, total strangers. Like I went to a mall and was there for like 10 hours, just like trying to work up the courage to talk to someone. And then we just wrote stories on them. And that
Wow.
was pretty much every class, was he was like, all right, your assignment is to write a story on this bill that was just passed in PG County. Go. And so we'd go out and we'd make our calls and do our interviews and we'd write. And if we had one fact error, one spelling error, we got a 0 out of 100. And so you just like learned through failure, just trial and error.
Ah, I love that.
And so that was like, so the way to write is just trial and error. Like if you want to be a writer, start a blog, start writing, and you'll figure it out as you go.
Yeah. And how do you push through writer's block? I'm experiencing that a little bit myself.
I think writer's block, at the end of the day, I think it is a little bit of arrogance, to think that like, because writer's block is essentially what I'm writing is no good,
Mm,
right? And but who's to determine what's good or not? And so I don't know if you've heard of James Altucher. He's an author, podcaster, entrepreneur. He has a thing where writers have to write 1,000 bad words a day, right? So if you write 1,000 bad words a day, at some point, right? I mean, we're talking about 365,000 words a year. Some of those words are going to be good. So he's like, if you have writer's block, just write through it. And if you have 1,000 bad words, and that's okay, you got them out of your system and you can go write the next day. And your next 1,000 words might be really good.
wow.
But, if your average book length is say 80,000 words and you write 365,000 words a year, well, you got a couple books just by writing 1,000, and maybe it'll take
That's
you an
cool.
hour to write 1,000 words or something. So I think writer's block at the end of the day, like you just need to let go of whatever expectations you have of yourself as a writer and just write. And so at least like even if you have 1,000 terrible words, like then when you're maybe not feeling so blocky, or you go out for a run or a walk and then you come back and like your mind's a little bit fresher, then you can kind of craft that into something a little good. But at least you have like some kind of clay to mold around instead of just nothing, a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah, I really like that. I need to start doing that myself. And I actually encourage, even if you don't want to be a writer, anyone out there, it's a really kind of healing activity. Even if it's just a free write. When I was traveling, and I know you're very well traveled yourself, but when I was traveling by myself, I was writing every day, kind of like on the regular, and I felt so much better after I like just did it, even if it was a journal entry or just maybe if it was just words that were coming to my mind. Would you agree? Is that something that you do as well?
Yeah, so my morning routine is I wake up, and honestly, the best way, while we're on the topic, the best way to overcome writer's block is by walking. For me, walking or running or doing some kind of activity where you're moving, but it's pretty autonomous, so you don't have to think about it, and so your brain just kind of shuts off, and it just sort of works out whatever it is that you need to work out.
Love
So
that.
that I think that's the best way to overcome writer's block. But so my morning routine is I wake up and I go for a walk, like a 20-minute walk around the
Cool.
Greenbelt in Hermosa Beach, and then uh, I drink some coffee, and with the coffee, I either read some kind of like scripture, be it the Bible or the Book of Mormon, or just some kind of faith based literature. And then after my first cup of coffee is finished with that, I journal. And then after I journal, then I read whatever nonfiction book I'm reading, which at the moment is The Purple Cow by Seth Godin. And then after I finish that, then I get into my own writing for the next hour or two
Wow, and this is every morning?
every morning.
And during that whole time, are you checking your phone at all?
No, so I actually I don't, my phone's on airplane mode till about, usually till about 10 o'clock most days. So
That's so
I
cool.
I put it on airplane mode around like 10 p.m. or whenever I go to bed, and then I don't turn it on until I'm finished writing my first story. So during beach volleyball season, when I have a lot going on, I'm usually up by like 6 o'clock. So I'm usually finished my first story by like 9:30 ish, and then I turn on my phone and kind of allow the world to start creeping in.
Dude, that's so cool. That's inspiring for me to hear because I don't do that, but I would like to start doing that. And I think I was watching an interview of you, and you said something about how you actually deleted your social media or your Instagram. And then when you want to do a post, you just download the app real quick, you make your post, and then you immediately delete it. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, I go through phases where I do that, where I'm just like, gosh, like Instagram, it's just because it's such a time suck. Like
Hmm.
you go to on Instagram to like post a story or like put up a picture or something, and then you're like, oh, well, look what the AVP put up. Oh, look, Bounce Beach has another highlight. Oh, Wexler's got a life update, and then like 20 minutes later, you're like, what just happened? And then
Right.
like then you end up not even posting what you went on there to do in the first place. So what I would do, I would just put up a story. I always put up the sunk swimwear quote of the day, and then I would delete it. And then I would download it the next morning, do the same thing, and then delete it again. And it was it was great because like if you're at traffic or if you're just like kind of sitting by yourself and you just like mindlessly pick up your phone and check it, and you don't even realize you're like automatically scrolling to Instagram. So it was just like the easiest way for me to like cut that habit.
That's really cool. I would actually challenge myself to try that before I challenge other people. So I'm gonna give it a shot.
Yeah, my wife thinks it's hilarious. She's like, "Well, can't you just like not check?" I'm like, "That's the thing, I can't."
Well,
So
but that's why I asked you about it because in this day and age, especially for entrepreneurs and podcasters, authors, like it's kind of part of our thing,
mhm.
and especially for the youth athlete or youth in general right now, it's part of their kind of daily life. So, I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. There's definitely lots of benefits from that stuff. I've actually met quite a few people from it, but I like your strategy in that where you're not like ignoring it, you're just controlling it and not allowing it to control you.
Yeah, because and like I'm not totally on board with the social media's terrible crowd. Like nothing good can
Right.
come of it. Because like you said, like you meet a lot of good people, you make a lot of
Mhm.
good connections, and like I got a few sponsors from Instagram, and
Right, right.
there's a lot of good that can come from it, but you got to maintain it and keep it
Yeah.
controlled. I feel like it's like a fire. Like fire is like really good, but then once it starts getting out of control, then it's just dangerous. So if you're just spending like your entire day just swiping and swiping and swiping, like nothing good really comes of that.
Whew. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about mindset, Travis. And again, I would really love to hear your perspectives both as an athlete and a writer. What is just give us a little glimpse on your mindset pre, during, and post training sessions or games. What does that mindset look like?
So I go into so I'll go into like a practice, right? And I'll say I'll have three things that I want to accomplish. Right. So I'll say I want to just focus on getting my hip square on my sets. Right. Or just facing where I need to set. Cause I'm a big fan of the side chuck set, and it's just helpful to know one because like I don't know where it's gonna go and my hitter certainly doesn't. And so I'll just pick three very definitive practical things to work on, and if anything goes wrong outside of those things, it doesn't bother me because I know that that wasn't really what I was working on that day. So, say I'm working on passing, if I like dime a pass and then go hit a swing 40 yards out of bounds, like that's okay because I got, I improved at what I wanted to improve. And so,
Love
for,
that.
for my mindset with a match, it might be a little bit different where it'll be more of a mindset where like I want to come out and be aggressive, right? Because in a match, like you can't be really happy if you're hitting balls, if you're spraying balls 40 yards out of bounds. But if I say, if I'm making aggressive mistakes, hitting high seam that go a little bit long, I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to make a mistake, that's the one to make, and I'm okay with that. And
I like that.
And so that's what I was so mad when I qualified for the 3-star in China this past fall, and we played this Russian team that was gnarly,
Who are
and
you
they
playing with?
I was playing with Mike Bogue,
Hey, shout
and
out
yeah,
Mike Bogue.
yeah, love Mikey, and so like they were serving me every ball, and this is a really good Russian team. Like they beat Phil and Nick in Warsaw, Poland, and so they were serving me every ball, and I was like, all right, I'm not going to swing low. Because in the match before, Adrian Hydrich had blocked me like 20 times. Like I swear, like if you watch the film of that, it's like it's just tragic. And so I was like, I'm not going to swing low. I'm swinging high and deep. And then like both sets were up 15-13. And I think like when it comes to crunch time, you revert to what you know. And I kind of like those low, like kind of chizzy swings. And we lost both sets 22-20 because I started going back to the low kind of chizzy swings and they just like kept blocking me. So I was like really mad after that match because like I did exactly what I didn't want to do at the most critical juncture. It's like my mindset is just like pick like, stay aggressive. And if you make like aggressive mistakes, like that's okay.
Right, right.
And
I
you got
like
to
that.
let those go. Yeah.
That's awesome. And can you just talk a little bit about as a writer or podcast host, just some of your mindset there?
I think the most important thing as a writer and a podcast host, and I think that like you are really good at this already, as I can see, is that it's not about you.
Mm,
So as a writer, like I hate it when authors put themselves into the stories when it's not relevant. When they're if like, someone if a writer is mentioning a quote, if I'm doing a story on you, I'm like, Aaron Wexler like told me that he wants to be the greatest of all time. Like you don't need to put yourself in that story. The story's not about you. Right? It's about Wexler. Right. And so in a podcast, the same thing is like when I'm interviewing someone, like my job is to stay out of the way. It's to just, shine the light on them and keep it there. Right. And when I'm writing, it's the same exact thing where, if I'm doing a feature on Katie Spieler, right, well, like one of the best humans on the planet, like I don't want to be a part of that story. My job is to show the best qualities of Katie Spieler. Right. And so that's what I look at as a writer and an interviewer is what's the best way I can shine their best qualities in the most creative light that no other writer has done before where I'm not a part of it.
that's so great, Travis. I mean, a couple of things to come to mind real quick. Number one, like I'm impressed with the way you interview people and the way you're able to grab so much detail out of somebody because you're like your memory is amazing. I mean, uh, right? I mean, you like even in this book, like you remember like the small little details of each little set and game from that particular tournament from that particular year, and you're able to just get the emotion out of somebody from that particular moment. I mean, where does that come from?
That was this class, University of Maryland. It was a feature writing class, and it was my teacher. Her name was Marlene Simons, and she was like kind of an award-winning science writer. But she was always so. What we would do, our class, she would give us a feature to read, like a really long form, like New York Times or Sports Illustrated, or a really long feature to read, and then we would go in, and it was a 3-hour class, and all we would do is pick apart that one feature and we would go paragraph by paragraph like why do you think this writer did this, and what I found was that what made those stories so good and so memorable was details
Mm,
and just the really little things that you can feel that story, right? So if I'm writing, a story on, Madison and Riley, like their story in New York when they first qualified and like, their grandma died like the night before. And like I wanted to put the reader in that bar with them the night before where they heard about their grandma passing. And so like and a lot of times when you ask these questions, it's kind of uncomfortable. It's like, well,
hmm
what was the name of the bar? Like, what were you guys drinking? But when you bring those details out, like your reader's literally sitting in the bar with them, and that makes that story so much more powerful when like they can see and hear and feel and smell what's going on.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a little note here. It says, you're so knowledgeable about every single player. I feel like, and like, well, part of that is not just that skill, but also the passion to find out,
Yeah.
right? And that curiosity, right?
Yeah, and I think with that is just it's just preparation. The interview is going to be so much better when you're prepared both for the interviewee and the interviewer. When I go into an interview and I'm not adequately prepared, I'm really nervous
hmm
because I'm like, gosh, I don't know how am I going to carry this conversation if we delve off of like these 3 topics that I know about. But,
right.
if I know almost more about their career than they do. Like if I know like specific scores of specific matches, then it's going to be really easy for me because I know that like no matter what they say, I will know what they're talking about, and then I can kind of steer the conversation any which way they want to go, and it's just more comfortable for everyone. And I also think that when you as an interviewer express that you are knowledgeable without throwing it in their face,
Hmm.
they'll also give you more respect. Like I know when I was talking to Jake Gibb, and he has a panoramic photo. The only sign of beach volleyball in Jake Gibb's house is a panoramic photo of the 1976 Manhattan Beach Open. And I mentioned that in an interview just in passing. And he was like, "Holy cow, dude, like that's a good memory." He's like, "You did your homework." Like, that's my favorite compliment is when I'm interviewing someone, they're like, "You did your homework." Because then I think there's a certain level of respect there, and that they're going to be more willing to open up to you because they know how much work you put into this interview. And maybe that's true, or maybe it's not, but that's just what I've experienced so far.
No, I think that's 100% true, especially in my recent experience. Maybe this is a good time to ask you about Eric Zaun. Can you just talk a little bit about your memory of him and any experience that comes to mind, or any other emotions that come up?
Yeah. So I mean, Eric, and it's where I mean we're a little bit less than I mean it's been like 11 months since he died. And it's crazy because like I'm looking at I have this photo wall behind me and I've got 4 or 5 pictures of him up there. But so the first time I met Eric, so he lived in his van, right? He was kind of known for that. He moved from Florida. He was originally from Jersey, so we're both East Coast guys. But so I see him at this AVP Next, and he's playing with Skylar McCoy, and uh, and I just see, and they were just like horsing around and goofing off, and like they never called each other by their real name. He's like, "All right, Shane, let's go, Randy. All right, Vanilla Ice, come on now, pick or pop," whatever it may be. And I was like, "Who are these guys?" And so Eric comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, I hear you're a writer." I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "You should write a story on me. I'm living in my van." And I was like, "Yeah, it does sound interesting." And so I did a story on Dig Magazine on him. And from there, like, we just started like being pretty good friends. And Eric had this, he had a funny reputation because, he was like loud and obnoxious, and like Eric was Eric. And if you didn't like Eric, he didn't care. And if you loved Eric, like that was great. But he didn't really care. He was just being him. And
Free
so
spirit.
and yeah, and so I saw him as just like this good, free spirited guy who maybe pushed the lines a little bit, but never really went over them. And so we trained a lot together, and then we ended up we were roommates for a while. I lived in the garage. So what we would do is so we had a 2 bedroom, 2 bath apartment in Redondo, and we would Airbnb it out. And so when it was Airbnb'd, Eric would go live in his van and I would live in the garage. And so what we did was we just took the biggest expense of everyone's life in California, rent, and we actually turned it into a profit.
Hmm.
And so we were just getting paid not to live in our own apartment, which is hysterical. And so Eric, when he was training in Brazil with Jeremy Casebeer, he calls me up. He's like, "Hey, dude, USA just emailed me and asked if we want to get a snow volleyball team together." And I was like, "Okay, sure." Like when and where. And so it was this trip from Austria to Italy, 10 days playing snow volleyball. So Eric like puts his team together, and he like kind of convinces Sean Scott that we would be better than the other team, who was in the running for it. So we go to Italy, and this is one of my favorite memories like of all time, not even just with Eric, but just ever. So we were on a bus from Austria to Italy, and Eric gets the bus to stop at a rental car place, like for us, just for the Americans, to pull off the highway, like go 5 minutes out of the way, drop us off. And so we find a rental car place, and Eric rents us a stick shift Fiat.
Hmm.
Well, none of us know how to drive stick. So Eric like pulls up, and there's this one other Italian guy in there. So Eric pulled up a YouTube tutorial, like 5 minutes. And the guy was like, "All right, this is how you drive a stick shift." And so we rent this car, and like I volunteered to drive. And so we just learned how to drive stick shift on the fly in Italy. The four of us is me, Eric, Chase Frischman, and Chris Vaughn. And so we take this a cross country trip through the Dolomite Mountains, and like it was snowy, and like I must have stalled out probably 15 or 20 times, like in the middle of the road, like went through an entire traffic light rotation at the same light because I kept stalling out. And like Eric was loving it. He filmed like every little bit of it and was cracking up. He's like, "That's some good adversity right there." And so and which to this day is one of my favorite mottos, like that's some good adversity.
Mm.
Like Eric, anytime like a weird situation presented itself, not only did he see it as like something that positive could come out of it, but at the very worst, it was going to be a great story. And so we always say like that's some good adversity. Now, me and my wife Delaney is partnered with Katie Spieler, who was dating Eric, and so like us three have been like best friends, like pretty much inseparable, kind of ever since. And so we pretty much do everything. And so like Eric was probably, I would say, like my best friend in California at the time. And so like just one of the all-time like great personalities and people like I've ever known.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for telling me that story and sharing that because, you know, I would love to have his legacy live on as someone who was all in with life. He just was, he loved it. Like my memories of Eric were just like, whether it was on the court training or when I was watching him compete, like he was just in it, you know, and he would bring it all the time. And it sounds like he brings it off the court too. And so, yeah, that's great to hear.
Yeah. And honestly, like, and I know it's weird like what happened and everything, but I think like he's a good definition of like a guy who's living an inspired life. You
Yeah,
know, like
I know.
Eric just did Eric, you know, he just
Right.
like he woke up and when he's like, I'm living in my van.
Yeah.
This is what I'm doing, you
Yeah.
know, and he just loved it. And one of my favorite things that's come out of that is you know, me and Katie and John Mesco, and one other who's chosen to remain anonymous, we founded the Eric Zaun Scholarship.
Oh,
And
very cool.
so last year we were able to, through donations, we were able to donate $2,000 to Megan Nash and Logan Weber. And then we were able to fly Casey Losick to AVP Chicago. And we were able to get Aurora Davis to a Norseca in Bonaire, which she ended up winning. So we ended up dishing out maybe like almost $6,000 worth of scholarships to get volleyball players to various tournaments that they otherwise like would have financially struggled to get to. And
Amazing.
it was so cool to see the community rally around that. And we have more funds this year, you know, whenever the AVP kind of decides that they're hosting tournaments. So we have funds again for the scholarship year 2. We have a bunch of applications. So it's been really cool to see his legacy live on in the form that's helping volleyball players in so many different ways.
No, that's awesome, man. I mean, you know, it's a great segue to my next segment here, which is about emotion, because what you did there with that fund is you took the tough emotional part of what happened and you transformed it into action. To me, that's inspired living.
Yeah. And that's like, honestly, I mean, that's a lesson directly from Eric is that like, so like Eric's passing was some serious adversity. Like one of the, probably the hardest thing that I've had to go through. You know, I've lived like a really blessed and fortunate 29 years. And so that was the first funeral I'd ever been to. You know, I still got, um, you know, 3 grandparents. And so like, you know, I really, death hasn't been a huge part of my life. And so like, that was an adverse situation. We're like, okay, well, like there has to be some good that can come from this. Let's figure out how we can make some good from it. And so
Absolutely.
we put it in the form of a scholarship. So like, you know, good can come from any bad situation, so long as you just take a second, think about it, you know, let your emotions do what they will and figure out, okay, well, how can we make this productive? And there can always be an answer.
Amen to that. That's awesome. Let's go back a little bit to in the game or in practice or
Mhm.
again back to your writing discipline. What are the differences and similarities in emotion from both an inspired practice and an inspired game?
That's a good question. One of my computer's on 5%. I may have to get a charger. Um, but
No problem. No problem.
the difference between an emotional practice and emotional writing, they're much the same. I think I'm like super happy. I'm in a great mood and it's just flowing. Right. So I think the difference maybe is that when I'm writing and I'm in like a super like flow emotional state is that things are moving super fast and I'm just cranking stuff out. Like I can write like, you know, maybe 10,000 words in 2 hours and just really not pause and look up. And then in a match though, when I'm like kind of like in that flow state, it's like everything's in slow motion, but in the same sense that I'm just like really content and I know that I'm doing like exactly what I need to be doing. Like I'm exactly where I need to be.
I love that, Travis. Let's move right into flow because since you mentioned flow state, when you're playing or writing or podcasting, uh, can you identify when you are in the game in the flow, in the zone?
There's only been so with writing, it happens pretty frequently,
Cool.
which is like great because I've kind of figured out my wife is delivering my computer charger,
Awesome. Teamwork.
and then when I'm writing, I've figured out the routine to get me in there. And so I know when I'm in the flow because I'm not like rewriting the sentences every 2 seconds. Like it's just I'm just letting it go. Um, when in a game, it's a lot harder because I think I've only probably been there once or twice. But for me, it I think the trigger is breathing, which is a lot tougher in a match when your heart rate's at 175 for 45 minutes straight. But when you just take like a big deep inhale and a long slow exhale, like before a serve, and you just only have one focus, I don't know, things just kind of happen. I remember I was in AVP Next. I was playing with Miles Mwakutu Tia. Love that guy so
Shout
much.
out Miles.
Yeah, and we were playing Paul Lotman and David Lee in the semifinals, and we won like 28-12. And like these are two Olympians, and like they're really, I mean, David Lee has made a semifinal, Paul Lotman's made a quarterfinal in the AVP, and it was just like things were just like going really slow, and I was just really in control of my breathing. And when something bad happened, which was pretty rare at that point in that match, it never bothered me. It didn't like phase me at all. I just went back, like big deep breath, long slow exhale, and we're going. And everything was just kind of like slow. And you have the inner game of tennis right there,
Hmm.
right behind you. And like I that if you guys have not read that book, all you listeners out there, that's a must read if you're an athlete or really just you just want to learn how to be good at life in general. And I was just kind of like taking advice from that. It's just like control your breathing, like think about all the stuff that is not about like passing a ball. You just control your breath and things will automatically go where they need to go.
I love that because the breath for me, like what triggers that for me is awareness, right? Because when you breathe like that, you're able to hear yourself one and self two, which is what that book talks about,
Yeah.
and so that's awesome. That to me, that's like the number one tool, like to have awareness on on your breathing, and then that gratitude feeling, which is like I'm so grateful for this moment. Like those to me are like the two specific tools that can keep me in that flow state.
Yeah, I love the gratitude. I think that that's so important where I think I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt maybe who said it, like you should do one thing that scares you every day.
Hmm.
So when you're in a situation and it's like 1919 and you're in the semifinals or the finals or maybe like, last like in a qualifier where it's really high stakes and you're like a little bit nervous and scared, like then you get super grateful. You're like, wow, I'm doing the one thing that scares me every day. And like you get just really grateful and happy for that moment. And I think Billy Allen wrote a great story about him and Ryan Doherty in Hermosa Beach, and they lost in the finals. And Billy was talking about how like it was just like he went from the highest of the highs to just this gut wrenching feeling losing in the finals because I think they were up like 14-11 at the freeze or something. And he wrote in his blog, he's like, how lucky am I to be able to feel emotions like that? Like your average 9 to 5 office worker won't get to feel those highs and lows. Like they don't get
Right,
to feel
right.
that full spectrum. And just we're so fortunate. So like even when you're feeling terrible, like you should be like, wow, like I get to feel the full spectrum of what it is to be human and alive and living. And it kind of reminds me of, have you ever seen the movie Hitch?
Yeah,
Where,
for
when
sure.
Will Smith is like knocking on Eva Mendes' door and he's like, I just want to be miserable, because like,
Yeah,
you're in love when you can just feel miserable,
it's so
right?
true.
And
Yeah,
anyone who's like been really inspired by a craft or just like loves their craft, like knows what it is to just feel miserable when things are going wrong, but you love it so much that you're going to work it out. And
I
I
love
just,
that.
yeah. And so I just think that when you can really feel that full emotional spectrum, like, you're doing the right thing.
I love that. So going back to flow for a second, because this is a challenging one, and I've been asking everyone this, and I would love to hear your again two perspectives if you
Mhm.
can. Is it possible to bank that flow state or that in the zone feeling in practice and then try to access it later in the game?
That's a good question. I see. I don't think it is because I think it. Like I know when I'm writing, for example, I know that like when I hit that flow state, that I get sort of paranoid about having anything interrupt it.
Mm,
And so, like, like, it's really funny, like, anytime my roommates, like, either when I was living in Baltimore or Florida or, like, my wife now, like, they can sort of recognize when I'm kind of in that state, and, like, they'll try to talk to me, and I got nothing. Like, I don't hear them, I don't really acknowledge them, and I just, like, nothing's getting me out of there. So I think that once you're in it, I think you just gotta stay in it. I don't really think you can just be like, hold on, let me just grab you and hang on to you for later. I think what would be vital is for you to take a step back and recognize, okay, what did I do to get me into this state? And Josh Waitzkin, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a
mm-mm.
he was a chess master. There's a book about him called Chasing Bobby Fischer.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so he was like a chess master. He was like 14, but so he wrote this book called The Art of Learning. And so what he did was he figured out his triggers to get himself into a flow state. And so he boiled it down to a 5-minute routine, a warm up routine to trigger that flow state. And so I think when, say, you get into a flow state of practice, afterwards, take a step back and like, okay, what did I do that led to me getting into that flow state? And that's the way
Mm.
you could bank it, by learning what triggered you to get into that state. Then you could do it when it's really mattering in a match or, a championship or whatever it may be.
Dude, that is huge. Remembering what it took to get there. That
Yeah.
and then bank that stuff. I love
Mhm.
that.
Or, maybe while you're in it, like, recognize, like, what are you smelling? What are you feeling? How does the sand feel on you? And maybe the sensations around you, maybe that'll get you into it, whatever it may be.
I mean, when you're really in it, I feel like you can actually kind of remember what you were thinking, because a lot of people say, oh, I was just like so in it, I don't even remember. But like when you get super aware, you can actually kind of remember like specific things. I remember specific things. Oh, like that shot's open, okay, right there, boom, like all that specific stuff that's happening. When you get
Yeah.
so clear and remember that stuff, I don't know if that's necessarily flow state, but it's kind of close to that feeling of like I'm in it, you know.
Yeah. Just like kind of any state of like heightened awareness.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like that's kind of what you're describing.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that, man. Um, let's talk about sources, Travis. Where do you get inspiration from?
It's a good question. You got a lot of good questions here, Wex. I
Thanks.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
Um, I get inspiration kind of from anybody who's really living. I don't. The cliche thing is like living their best life or whatever, but just someone who's out there who is making it work despite the odds. Because anytime you look at someone who is at the pinnacle of what they have done, like they have gotten through insurmountable odds, right? Or seemingly insurmountable. Like when I don't know if you've read Shoe Dog, and I know I'm dropping a lot of books here,
No,
but
I love it.
Shoe
Keep dropping names. I love it.
so Shoe Dog is the story of Phil Knight founding Nike, right? And there were so many times throughout Phil Knight's career with Nike that Nike should have been shut down or bankrupted, or like he thought about it. He was like, we're done, right? But he just kept pressing forth. And you just find a way. Right. And this is one of my favorite movie quotes is in Jurassic Park. And he's just like, life will find a way. Right. And so I just look at guys, either it could be businessmen, it could be athletes, it could be writers, it could be actors or producers or whatever, who they have found a way, because anybody who is at the top has overcome something. So you just look at it like, what did they do? What did they tap into that allowed them to overcome that and reach whatever level that they have reached? So that's why I love reading books, because they're almost like memoirs are fantastic, because they're almost all about someone overcoming adversity or odds and getting to the top. And it's like, well, if they can do it, then like, look at me. Like I grew up in like this great middle class family. Like I had all the resources in the world. I went to college. Like what excuse do I have?
Hmm.
Right. So that's
Right,
why
right.
I like looking at other people who have done it. And I'm like, okay, they can do it. I can do it too.
That's awesome, dude. I've, it like you also remind me of someone who would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you could find inspiration anywhere,
Yeah. There's
right?
inspiration literally everywhere.
Right, right.
And like, for example, like on my walk every morning around the green belt, I see this guy, this homeless guy, and he sleeps on the same bench. And I always say like, hey, good morning. And he always smiles and says, good morning. And we
Cool.
talked today, like what a beautiful day it was. I'm like, this guy here is like, he's smiling and he's happy, and he's just happy with like a bench to sleep on in nature. right? So like, what excuse would I have to be unhappy? Like, you can find inspiration literally from anywhere in the world, so long as you take 2 seconds to pause and think about
Yeah, dude. Amen to that. I love that. And I'm inspired again, I'm inspired by you,
it.
not only because of the way you live your life. It's also like the amount of illusions that you can come up with. Like you can just allude to any of this stuff or movies or people or like that's inspiring to me. So that's awesome, man. Let's move on to the lightning round.
Yeah.
And again, you can answer these however you want, but I'm going to try to go a little bit quicker. How do you define success? And what does being successful mean to you?
For me, I think successful means that I can, well, kind of two definitions here.
Hmm.
So I have like kind of a definition of like wealthy, right? So for me, wealthy is being able to make a living from whenever I want.
Right.
So if I can write, for example, that's why I love being a writer. I can write whenever and wherever I need, so long as there's Wi-Fi and I can sort of make a living. So to me, having that freedom to not go into an office or be kind of on someone else's schedule like that,
Hmm.
to me would be my definition of wealthy. And to get me there, like successful, is that I wake up and I'm excited about what I'm doing, and that's it. And so like, there's no like, I'm not trying to like climb any ladder or like reach any financial goal. But if I have those two things aligned, then I'm successful and wealthy and I'm happy.
Love it. I love that. How do you consider the idea of failure?
Yes. So I think failure is such an interesting topic these days. So like, we hear these things and it's like fail fast, fail fast, fail fast, and like fail and fail and fail again. But I think that there's a little bit of misconception there. I think we've over fetishized failure, because I think we've come to look at failure as a good thing, but there is a way to fail, right? So if I lose and I lose, if me and you were playing a match and you beat me because I hit 30 cut shots in a row and you sided out every one of them, and I'm like, you know what? I didn't fail. I learned. But then the next time I play you, all I do is hit cut shots. Then I did fail because I didn't learn anything, right? So failure is your failure to learn and to adapt and to grow. And so if I were to lose to you in the Laguna Open and I hit 30 cut shots, right? And I play you in the Laguna next year and I beat you on hitting line shots and jumbos, then that loss the previous year was not a failure because I learned.
That's funny.
Right. So I think when we look at failure and we're like, you know what, we lost, but that's fine because we learned. You can't just assume you learned. Like, you got to dig into that failure, and it hurts and it'll sting and it'll be prickly. But like, if you don't do that, you're not going to learn and you're not going to grow. And then you did fail.
That's so well said, Travis. It reminds me of Kobe because when he was asked something similar to that, he said, "Yeah, I watched those losses hard.
Yeah.
I got into them, like you just said. I dug into them." And he was like, "Man, I would study those losses, and a lot. You know what? A lot of athletes are afraid to do that. Where it's too painful. It reminds us of the emotion too much." And it's hard for us to manage the emotion of the loss, so we just want to like push it away.
Yeah.
But I love what you said, like, no, dig in.
Yeah. And after, gosh, I forget, maybe after AVP Austin this year, I watched the film that night and we lost to Paul Outman and Gabe Ospina, who ended up having a tremendous tournament. They upset Jake and Taylor in the first round. But I watched it that night and Delaney was like, are you like, you're going to watch that now? I was like, yeah, like I have to, like,
Yeah.
I can't let it go. So
Right, right.
I have to dig into it right after it just eats at me.
That's great. Well, that kind of almost answers the next question, but let's go for it. What are the most successful habits that you do on a consistent basis?
I think the most successful habit I have is routine.
Yeah.
Um, I love my morning routine. Like, and the good thing about it is that it's transportable, right? So
Hmm.
I can do that morning routine anywhere I go, so long as I have a place to walk and a book to read, which,
Hmm.
it doesn't take up too much space. So I think that having that routine, it just puts me into just this mind space where like I have a win before 9 o'clock every morning at the very latest. Right. So I think the most successful habits for me is reading, journaling, and exercising. And if you do those three things every single day, you just can't lose.
Mm, I love that.
Especially if you knock them all out before most of the other people are awake.
Love that. Real quick, speaking of routine, are you familiar with Wim Hof?
Yes.
So he got me on that cold shower right in the
Oh yeah, I
morning.
love a cold shower.
Do you do that too?
Yeah.
I started doing that and it kind of changed my life, quite honestly. The first couple months were difficult, but it's become part of my routine and my body feels better. My mind feels sharper.
Yeah, it'll wake you up when you
Yeah.
do that. And I make sure so usually I do cold showers after I work out. And that'll like kind of cool me down. But if you do it in the morning, phew, you're awake.
hmm
So I make sure I do a cold shower before a match. That really that gets you going.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of this project, I've been coming up with words that I think of for each guest.
Okay.
Um, I'm going to tell you my word for you after I ask you what you would say. What is your word for
Oh,
yourself?
I like it. I
I'm
like it.
going to put you on the spot. What's the
All right.
first word that comes to mind that best describes you?
Um, introspective came to mind.
Nice.
Um, and I think I think that's a more recent development. As I've gotten older, so my parents, I have my dad who's soft spoken, introverted, and kind of the quiet, the strong, quiet type. And then there's my mom who's just like super extroverted and outgoing and like, hey, how are you? And I think as I've gotten older, I've kind of become more of my dad, and where I stop and take my time and think about things before I do them, and then think about like take a good minute to really inspect like what happened, what went wrong, what went right afterwards. So I think introspective, and I think that comes along with reading and writing and journaling. That a lot of that is introspective and meditative.
Mm, love that. Okay, and I agree with you. But I was struggling to come up with one word for you. I actually came up with two, um, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
The first one is persistent,
Okay.
and and that to me is just kind of watching you develop into a beach volleyball player. You just kept grinding, kept getting better and better, and that's me as a competitor against you, as well as your teammate, as
Yeah.
well as just a fan. So I could just see this persistence in you. And then the other word that came to mind is amiable, and you just have this way to connect with people. But it's because people can connect with people, and that's cool, that's a skill, but you have this amiable way to do it. You're so nice, you're so kind, and that kind-hearted, that's another word that came up to mind, that kind-heartedness. I just wanted to ask you, like, do you remember always having that? Did that kind of develop, you know?
Yeah. So I appreciate that. Those are like great compliments. You're just like you make me blush over here.
Good.
But I think that developed at a pretty young age with my mom. I was really close. I'm still really close to my parents and my family. And so my mom was always just like super nice and friendly, and she always taught us to be, nice and friendly. And what I found is that like when I was nice to people, they're nice back.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do it in a fake way. Like you can just genuinely be nice, and that's how people are doing. And like if you smile at 100 people, someone's gonna smile back. And so what I found is that like you create the environment around you, and that the nicer you are to people, like the nicer they're going to be in return, as long as it's genuine. I think that genuine is probably the most important part of that, is that people can sniff out when it's fake, kindness or whatever. And then they're like, okay, well, what are you really after? But if you're just like really actually enthusiastic, like you are clearly like enthusiastic and happy like with this interview, right?
Mhm.
None of this is fake. And so like I can sense that, and like that's going to make me happier to like talk to you. So I've just learned that like, when I really genuinely care about the other person across from me, they're probably going to reflect that back. and
Absolutely.
and that's just kind of the way that I try to live my life.
Absolutely. Authentic is another word that comes to mind for you.
Appreciate that.
Um, for you, Travis, what is the most important lesson that has helped shape who you are today?
I think that, man, there's a lot. um the most important, I think, is to accept the fact that if you're really trying to work at something, that not everyone is going to approve or like that, or kind of like that, right? So I like my life path has probably been like, if my parents weren't like super faithful in like the fact that I was going to achieve it. Like, they probably had some hesitation. They're like, well, he's going to be a writer and then he's going to move to Florida and then like beach volleyball. Like, we never played volleyball. He's 24. He's never picked up a volleyball. Like, what's he doing moving across the country? Right. So when you're out there and you're doing something and you're trying to do something remarkable, and I'm not even saying that like what I do is remarkable, but like trying to do what you love, someone isn't going to approve of it. And you just need to accept that. So like when you put yourself out there into the world, someone is going to disagree with the way you do it. Right. So if I like say good morning, how are you to someone and they say, what do you mean good morning? It's raining. Like they'll disapprove, and
Right,
you're
right.
not everyone's going to agree with what you're doing. And that so but at the same time, it's like people are going to dislike what you're doing if you are going out there and being yourself and you're risking it. But people are also going to dislike what you're doing if you're playing it safe. So you might as well, if you're going to fail, you might as well go for, fail while daring greatly, as Teddy Roosevelt said. And that I have the man in the arena on my door up there. It's my favorite quote ever. So I think that actually, the man in the arena is probably the biggest lesson that has shaped my life. Is that so? The quote, and I'm going to get it a little bit wrong. It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or how the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives, who errs again and again, who knows the trials of shortcoming, but does so while daring greatly. Right. So he'll never know. And so at least if he fails, he, here we go. At least if he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Right. So if you're going to do something, like at least you're going to do it, and you're not going to be on the sidelines watching someone else and like criticizing them. So you just be that man in the arena, I think, is a long way of me saying that's the best lesson that I've learned in my life.
Wow, man. You're so awesome. Can you share the biggest challenge you've been through on your journey?
The biggest challenge. It's, I think, probably with my first book. So my first book was a fiction book on golf called The Last 18. And so I wrote it, and I had no idea. I always wanted to write a book, and I had no idea what to do with the manuscript when it was finished. So I finished the manuscript. I'm like, and I finished it. I was at my girlfriend at the time, her place at the University of Maryland. I was like, so I have this book, but now what? We were like, I don't know. So I researched it. And so you had to find an editor. Editor takes a look at it, which I probably asked a couple hundred editors and got one to bite. Editor sends it back and he's like, okay, here's 100 different agents that you can contact to represent you. So I probably got rejected maybe 90 times by different agents. And that was the first time I'd ever dealt with failure, like
Mm,
on like a pretty serious scale. Where, because like I'd made every team that I tried out for growing up. Like I got into the dream school, I got into I graduated the journalism school, I got a job at the Washington Post right out of college. Like my life at that point like had been extremely blessed. Like I had very little obstacles, and then here comes 90 straight rejection letters. I'm like, oh my god. So like I'm sending these letters out like knowing, and like then I was like, all right, send it out. In 2 weeks they'll just say no. And I was like, really, it just like it killed me. And
mm,
then I finally got, but the thing is that you only need one yes. You
right,
can get 100,000 no's. If you get one yes, that's it. So
right.
the biggest challenge for me was just to keep going. And so I finally got an agent. And then an agent that book was in like was in the finalists to get published by Random House. But they ended up passing. And like, that was kind of a big blow, but I was like, all right, well, if like Random House was like kind of debating it, then like, it must be okay. And so it ended up getting picked up a couple of months later and getting published. And that was, writing a book, I think, was the biggest, like most satisfying moment. And because I was like, that is hard to deal with that much rejection. And like you're writing a book and working on it, and you know how hard of a process it is just to write, and then to get it published is a whole nother journey that I had no idea how difficult it was. So just overcoming all that rejection. But it's been so good because now I understand that like rejection doesn't really matter. All you need is
Mm,
one yes. Right. So it doesn't
love
really
that.
matter what A, B, C, D, E, F, G, to double Z think, as long as you just get to one person who's like, yes, that's my guy.
That's awesome. I'll probably be picking your brain about editing and publishing and all that
Yeah,
stuff
man.
too.
Happy to help. I am an open book to help any prospective author. So if any listeners out there want to write a book, feel free to hit me up, because I had no idea what I was doing. So I
Yeah,
needed a resource to walk me through, and I didn't have one, which ended up being a blessing in disguise, as they always turn out to be. But happy to help.
that's awesome. That's really cool. Just a few more here for you, buddy. How important is the idea of having impact to you?
I think that that is huge, but I think if you go out wanting, like, if that's your goal to make an impact, I almost think it's backwards. Where I think
Mhm.
if that's almost like if you go out to win a match, what you should really be focusing on is you should go out to win practice every day. So whereas, if I'm out to make an impact, what I really should be doing is working to be the best version of myself and create the best writing and be the best podcast interviewer. And by extension, I will be making the impact that I strive to make without that being really the end goal that I'm trying to do.
Love it. I love it. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received and why?
Um, I think, I mean, my mom, she was just like, you can do whatever you want. you know and I think that certain things obviously have their genetic limitations, but could I go out and beat Michael Phelps? Maybe not. But the point is that I could try, and that whether I be end up beating Michael Phelps or not, along that path I'll find something that I can be really good at, and then that can, if you just go. And I hate the thing, like, follow your dreams or chase your passions or whatever. But if you just like kind of go and seek what really does light you up, and you kind of let that lead you down the way, you're gonna find it eventually. So I think just go, do things, like experience life in all of its many layers and beauties, and you'll find something that's gonna work for you.
Love that. And you were an awesome swimmer. We didn't really talk about that too much.
I picked it up. I was a little bit longer, so it was beneficial. And I was a good distance runner, and so I had kind of the cardio. So
Hmm.
swimming was kind of a natural fit. I got these long arms, and I can hold my breath forever, so it wasn't too tough.
I love it. This is perhaps the best question I could ask you, bud.
All right,
What is your ultimate why?
my ultimate why. I think, man, I wrote a story on this. Back when I first qualified on the AVP tour in Austin. And so right before that, Rafi Paulus, who's my partner, he's like, "Why do you want to qualify?" And I was like, "Because I want to qualify." Like, yeah, like, what do you mean? And but then I really thought about it, and it's just my why is just like I'm doing the things I'm doing because I'm trying to sort of like become the role models that have set before me. And I know that, like, if I'm trying to embody the traits of, 30 different people or 100 different people that I admire, that I will then become an entirely new person that maybe someone else will look up to. Um, so my why is to just try to really just create my own path, and to show someone else, if they want to be a writer, beach volleyball player, podcaster, random dude, like, they can do it because this guy did it. And like, what, he picked up beach volleyball at 24. Like, why? So I think that it's just to show, um, to kind of follow in the footsteps and try to lead just a good life. And, whatever that looks like to you.
Yeah.
Because for me, like, whenever I go out and I'm like, I'm gonna try to do something good today, good things happen.
Love it, man. You're so inspiring. Looking back on your journey, is there anything you wish you could change and why?
For me, no. I've tinkered with the idea of, I wish I picked up volleyball earlier, but I have this habit of finding a passion and just diving headfirst, straight into the deep end. And after 4 or 5 years, when I get pretty proficient at it, I'm so burned out because I never like took a breath to look up, that I pick up something new. So I did it with swimming. I did it with golf. I got down like a scratch golfer. I did it with basketball. Somehow it hasn't happened with writing. I have no idea, because I've been doing that since fifth grade. But with beach volleyball, like, I think that if I had picked it up earlier, I probably would have burned myself out of it. So I really don't have any regrets, because like my life has been just so, like, I've done so many different things that I think that all that different learning has kind of led me to where I am at the moment. And I'm really happy and fulfilled with where I am at the moment, and in the direction, the trajectory that I'm going.
No regrets. I love it. Um, Two more questions for you. So again, this whole project was based on the Pyramid of Success by John Wooden. Inspired me to make my own pyramid about inspired living. Do you recommend other people out there, whether they're athletes or writers or podcasters or anybody, do you recommend that they make some sort of, it doesn't have to be pyramid, but some sort of like compass or roadmap to get where they want to get to?
Yeah, for sure. I think, and either they could write it out or just have it in their head or whatever, but just like think about it like, what could I do that would make me wake up every morning excited?
Right.
I think just if you ask yourself that really simple question and just journal about it, meditate on it, pray about it, if that's your thing, you'll find your answers. And then once you figure out the various things that could get you excited, then you can be like, okay, what can I do that could embody all of these things and get me excited about every morning? So I think, yeah, and everyone will have their own compass, their own pyramid, whatever it may be. But I think it's super important for someone to just introspect and think about the stuff that would really just kind of light their soul on fire.
Amen, bro. All right, last question. You mentioned it earlier about fulfillment. I just want to kind of just talk to you for a second about that. What does that mean to you? And what comes to mind when you hear that word fulfillment?
I think fulfillment often gets confused with happiness.
Hmm.
So, like, happiness is eating like a donut, right? You're really happy about it, but it's really temporary, right? And happiness can a lot of times be fleeting, and it can almost be backwards, right? Where that temporary moment of happiness will then lead you to, oh, well, that donut didn't actually make me happy because now I feel like I got to go run 5 miles, to work it off. So fulfillment is knowing that you're going in the right direction, even when things are going wrong. So if I wash out of pool play in the CBVA, I'll be mad, but I'll know that like that was a good productive day because now I'll have learned something from it. I might not be happy, but I'll be fulfilled because I did what excites me in the morning. I did what I love to do. I was out there, I was exercising, and I ended up coming away with a learning moment that will then further my trajectory up. Right. So I'm improving myself. So I think improvement goes along hands with fulfillment, that as long as I'm learning and growing and improving every day, that would be fulfillment, that I'm satisfied with the day and what I did with
Travis, dude,
it.
you're so awesome, man. I cannot thank you enough for spending the time with me today and sharing some of your insights and memories and illusions and just thoughts, man. And just, like I wanted you to be a part of this project because I know that you're living your version of an inspired life, and you set out to do that every day. And it's apparent in this interview. I mean, it's so awesome. I can't thank you enough, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I just love catching up with you, Wax. I'm glad to
Yeah.
see everything's going well with you. And I love the Gandhi quote in the background.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tell us real quick again, where we can find you, your Instagram, your podcast, all that stuff.
Yeah, so podcast is with my boy Triborn. It's called the Sandcast Podcast, on Instagram at TramMew, and then Twitter at Travis_Mew. And so any writers out there who want to hit me up with any questions, feel free. Happy to help you guys along.
Absolutely. And I'm also going to link that one. I'm going to link I'll add a link to that for a purchase for anyone who wants to get your book, and I highly recommend it. It's a great book.
Appreciate it.
Again, Travis, thank you so much for being on today, and we'll talk to you soon, man.
Wex, my guy, have a great day.
You too, bro.
All right, later, bud.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining me on Within the Game podcast. Visit withinthegame.com for show notes and links on everything we talked about today. You can also subscribe to the mailing list, which will give you exclusive content from each guest, as well as more resources to help you stay inspired in and out of your game. Follow us on Instagram at Within the Game Podcast.